And to me, it's like coming home in a way. And I think it's an amazing team, and I want to thank everybody for this opportunity every year to all come together. As he said, I work in production and in the market. So I have 12 minutes, I'm timing myself, because Jose Luis asked me just to share with you what I've learned recently, because I spend a lot of time going back and forth between Europe and mostly Los Angeles. So briefly, I'm an American. I've lived in Paris for 27 years. I worked for about 16 of those at a large broadcaster called TF1, which is the largest private broadcaster in Europe in the children's department. And now I work in feature films with an independent company called Indie Sales. And we distribute live action and animation. And amongst the animation films, there's Another Day of Life that we've shown here many times. We have upcoming films that I'm very proud of. I try to buy very strong A-list festival films that can travel in the market, so it's kind of a specific niche. And then I work with a large studio called Blue Spirit in France, which is in France and Canada, and I do the international development and the pre-sales. So I just want to quickly tell you about what I've learned in LA, but I'd like to know, I can't see very well who's here, but how many people here are creators? Who's making things? Okay, great. And how many are producers? Okay, good, a few less. I'm like the worst at PowerPoint in the world, so I have like 3 words. But the 2 big things that I've learned this last year going back and forth between Los Angeles and France are 2 words, premium and plus. So what the platforms are really looking for is what they call premium content. Doesn't really matter what format it is, if it's a series or a film or an anthology or a short series, or if it's serial or if it's standalone, they want premium. And the easiest way to understand what that word premium means until you start to see it and get it is that they want something kind of in between film and TV, but they want it for a television, for a broadcast budget. So that's that first challenge, is how do you do that? And the other word that they keep talking about all the time is plussing. So I always thought plus was kind of a mathematical term, like 1 + 2, but no. Plussing is like, how do you take it one bit further? How do you plus it? It's like become a verb. So that's where I think that we in Europe have an amazing advantage, because we can plus in a way that the American studios don't think about. And we have this wonderful, vibrant community where we work on, as they were saying, on comic books, and then you work on a TV show, and then you work on somebody's feature, and you move around, and you work in Ireland, and you work in France, and you work in Spain, and that adds a huge plus that doesn't happen to people so much in the North American market, where they get very formatted. So that's a really exciting thing that we can add. I think it's really a market that has a huge amount of opportunity, and built in, it has a bunch of constraints. So now you can work for these platforms as a creator, as a producer, or as a production company. And I've been doing those 3, and they each have a sort of specificness to them. As a creator, that's what they're all looking for. And they'll sort of take you in any form possible, and then they'll try to format you into how you can fit in their veins. So you have traditional broadcasters, you have platforms, and you have the whole YouTube world, which in America, and in North America specifically, and starting to be in Europe, is where most kids get their content. And so they use that as a way to promote everything they're doing. And now large producers like Sony and other people are actually thinking about, because they can pay for the content themselves, they'll just put it out on YouTube. They don't need the support of a Netflix or Apple or HBO Max or whatever the other one's going to be, because they have to go into all their constraints. They can just do it themselves. So it's actually a really interesting opportunity for creators. The other thing that I think is really fascinating is that the way that you can build new concentric circles in your content. So you can start out with something actually quite small, and you can build that into other things as you kind of build your network around you. And so what's fascinating is to use these different platforms to launch yourself and then to connect with like-minded people and grow. For a producer, it's a bit more complicated because they squeeze you. So they want most of the rights. They only want probably 2 seasons for these anthology series, because what they found is that after 2 seasons, people stop watching, with the exception of certain shows where actually they're stronger, but the norm for them is that. They want all the local SVOD rights. So that's hard when you're working with a local broadcast partner, because they want it too. That's kind of like the really difficult thing to negotiate. And because the launch of these platforms is going to really depend upon, or the longevity is really going to depend upon their weight in the international market, they're going to be very greedy about those rights. They change their ideas all the time. They change their staff all the time. So it can be very difficult to navigate, to understand who's doing what, where are they doing it. But the one thing I can tell you is that they're reading every single email and they're talking to themselves all the time. So it's like the people said yesterday, it was like all of a sudden out of the blue, they contacted you, or they, whatever that means, some executive from one of these platforms contact you, and that's exactly how it works. It's like these people working in these platforms are really very, very dedicated, devoted, keyed in, proper executives, and they're looking all the time. But another, I think, major constraint is that there's no one doing any programming. So as these interfaces get more clogged with content, it's hard to find it. So a lot of producers I've been talking to in Los Angeles are actually doing their own marketing, because that's how they're actually able to reach their audience. They can't rely on the platform's audience. All right, let's see. So we have sort of these 2 things about children versus adult content, but actually the jackpot is in kids and family. So if you look at the kind of bellwether shows that the platforms are creating, Star Wars, Marvel, Gremlins, they're using huge IPs from their studios and turning them into anthology, extremely ambitious series. So what we know about this is that the stickiness in these platforms is around kids and family. So what is kids and family? So I was just recently at Cartoon Forum in Toulouse, and then at a wonderful event called Cartoon Springboard for emerging talent in Valence. And the difference between those 2 events really kind of made me think about, okay, so who exactly am I working for? And I don't know a lot about adult content, but I know a little bit about kids and family. And what I thought was interesting was when I was waiting to take the plane, I picked up this issue of Time magazine. And this is a very mainstream American news magazine, but there actually was exactly the things that I've been really thinking about in it. So let me just show you a few images. These are the kids and their families that we're working for now. And they're extremely different than when I was a kid, and they're extremely different than when even my daughter was a kid. And they're very righteous, they're very strong, they're very smart, and they're extremely empowered. This is just pages out of this magazine I ripped out. Then this is another wild thing, is that Mattel is actually making toys that are gender neutral. So that's something to think about when you're creating content that you want to touch a large audience, is that all this stuff just doesn't really matter anymore. And also this idea that kids are really, because they're so righteous, they're starting to think a lot about consumerism. And they're starting to really think about, as they're galvanizing themselves, or even little children watching their older brothers and sisters, and that also has a huge influence on families, is why am I buying all this stuff? So I think that what that means is that it's providing an amazing opportunity for creativity. So as I started to kind of go through why I was so sort of disappointed with Cartoon Forum and the way everybody's making the same shows, the same content, and what I was so excited about, at Cartoon Springboard was this like kind of unbridled view of how I can talk to people and what I'm doing. So I think the big difference is if you're working for kids and family, you need to spend time with kids because kids bring their families. And it's not really about like your own kids, it's about kids, what they're doing today, what their concerns are. And then sort of taking that through your own filter of the stories you want to tell and the people you want to touch, and any style, it's totally wide open in terms of style. And you really sort of push it. And you should feel empowered by pushing that. And then also there has to be something extremely authentic. There's one thing that I've learned in working for kids for many years is that they really smell it when it's fake. And I think that as we're moving away, there's still going to be this preschool market that is just sort of infested with selling toys. So that's not such a great place to try to break out. But as soon as you start to work for older kids, you can bring their parents along and you can really start to sell some strong stories. How much time do I have? I was recently at another event in Poland, and I heard a distributor talking about what they were looking for in films, and they said, you can't talk about divorce, you can't talk about death, you can't talk about transgender. And I just thought, like, you got to be kidding me. This is just completely out of touch with the market, and I actually think the market is moving a lot faster than the traditional approach. And so I would really encourage you to dig into where you're from, into books you loved, into stories that really inspire you, and to move from there. The one thing that's super important when you work with the North American market is that you have to have their respect. And if you have their respect, sort of the sky is the limit. And that respect passes by really clear communication. In America, information is something you share. It's not something you keep. Where I live in France, it's something you hold on to. But your network and your credibility are all about what you share and what you exchange. You don't have to hold on to anything. And it's very important to be extremely honest about where you're at. So I thought it was great when somebody said yesterday that they were worried about like asking for more money and that kind of thing. Once you've gained their respect as a producer, you can really ask for more. You can ask for more. You build a partnership, because that's what people are really interested in, is building a partnership. So that all sounds very nice, but how do you make those connections? I think the first thing to remember is that a lot of executives that are very good are really looking all the time. So if you figure out a way to promote your content, they're going to find it. It's also really important to find a local champion. So, sort of do your homework, find out who's in LA, who's doing things, connect with them, show them your work, get them involved in what you're doing. I thought it was really nice what someone said earlier about how they worked on comic books and then they worked on TV shows, and there were all these sort of things that were bouncing off of each other. I would encourage you to do that as much as possible. I would encourage you to team up with one another. We have this sort of like certain studios that are very strong in terms of how they work internationally, but also in the culture they have. Like, we've talked so much about Cartoon Saloon in the last few weeks. That's a studio that has a very strong culture where people are helping each other all the time. That's the kind of environment you want to work in and you want to build. And then lastly, I think, I'm not very good at this, but I think self-promotion is really important. And really working with like-minded people. And then it's also really about doing work that you feel really, really strongly about, because that authenticity really comes through. Okay, I think I went a bit over, but I want to wish you all the very best, and I'm sure you're going to make a lot of great stuff. Thank you.